Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. I'm so glad we're revisiting this edition. Today is episode 204, More Fucked Up Things People Did with Mummified Remains. Oh, my friends, if you're a long-time listener of this show, and I mean a long-time listener, then you know, for a troubling amount of time, affluent Westerners' treatment of the dead has been, let's just say, one-sided. For example, way the fuck back, in episode 064, How Human Brains Were Once Used as Medicine, we learned, well, not only that, but 360 years ago, a little someone named King Charles II of England purchased a recipe from a physician named Jonathan Goddard. The recipe, of sorts, was rumored to be the only cure at the time for a common and annoying ailment, headaches. And I say of sorts because the tonic itself was composed of only 2 ingredients: your favorite alcohol and about 5 pounds of human skull, which you would crush into a powder and then distill. Sounding completely logical, the king easily handed over 6,000 pounds, which is a lot of money even today. When you clickety-clack for inflation, in the 1660s, that was the equivalent of about 630,000 pounds. And it didn't even make a dent in the royal's pocket. Now, if you haven't had a listen to episode 064 and you're wondering whose skulls exactly would be used in such a manner, and then you thought about it for a minute and were like, oh, probably the skulls of those he colonized, you're right. From 1536 to 1691, Ireland was under invasion, which led to an eventual conquest and colonization with Protestant settlers from Great Britain. King Charles II preferred the skulls of the Irish, paying gravediggers there to provide a steady flow of heads. But don't worry, it gets more messed up. Way the fuck back in episode 088, of course that happened. Egyptian mummies were once used as an ingredient in paint. We learned a number of things here too. Like how grinding people up and adding them to liquor was just a drop in the bucket. No pun intended. For literally centuries prior, and for centuries after, upper-class Europeans snorted, drank, and consumed bodies from Egypt and all in the name of health or for thrills. The mummy craze hit its peak in the 1800s when some European artists decided to add these remains to paint. Yes, Egyptian mummies were mixed into a color embarrassingly called mummy brown. And it sold until the 1960s. Yeah. And it wasn't moral outrage that stopped the production and sales. Oh, no. In an interview for an issue of Time magazine back in 1964, a managing director at Robertson & Co., a paint manufacturer, admitted they pretty much ran out of mummies to use. Today, I've got a few more historical stories that tell these previous stories to hold my King's Drops, which was the name of the tonic, by the way, the King's Drops. In the first half of the show, we're going to talk about a 400-year-old mummified arm that's dangling from the ceiling of a church called St. James the Greater. And yeah, it's still there. It's right above the entrance. We will get into why that it's there, how in the holy hell it got there to begin with, and the other gob-smacking events which took place underneath it. Needless to say, today is going to be a heavy photo day, so you'll want to have our social media stuffs open and ready to go first thing. After the break, we're going to talk about how the mummified corpses of saints were put into bed with diseased royalty. Yeah, forget the tonic. We've got the whole damn body. One's belonging to saints, too. And yes, I can hear you. You're probably asking, why? Why royals would do this? And which ones did this? Well, I usually don't share the why of a topic in the intro, but I'm going to provide a clue here because it is so intense, it makes for one hell of a cliffhanger. Quote, "The Christian belief in the resurrection of the body as well as the soul implies that all bodies are sacred, so venerating moral remains is considered natural. Relics, which hold the power that the saints had once... Relics, which hold the power that the saints had once channeled when they were alive, aren't merely a symbol of the divine, but the embodiment of it. Lying next to these remains, in their own private rooms, was unattainable for regular people. Yet for the Habsburgs, which we'll get into, this was an act of faith, a powerful reminder of both their own mortality and the hope for an afterlife, as well as an expression of their great power and their privilege." End quote. From a website with a metal as fuck name, orderofthegooddeath.com. So, grab a blanket and a pillow. We are transporting ourselves into the past. We are transporting ourselves into the past, transforming ourselves into royals. We'll be dying and cuddling up to centuries-old corpses. Hi, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my pristine business goose. To begin, I'm going to need you to toss on a light jacket and some comfortable shoes, because we'll be taking a stroll through a city that's home to a number of beer spas, and what could possibly be the world's first cafe, having opened in the 16th century. It's also home to the biggest castle complex in the history of humankind, covering an expansive 18 acres, and includes a number of mansions, gardens, chapels, and cathedrals. It's also home to at least another 100 spires, thanks to the many, many, many buildings that have been constructed and preserved throughout its history, beginning in the 9th fucking century. I'm talking about Prague. And we won't be seeing or visiting any of this, actually. Today, we're going to church. Specifically, St. James the Greater in the old town side of a damn old city. And for my fellow geographically challenged Americans who have heard of Prague before but are still not sure where it is and are wondering how old this church is to be in the old town and why we're doing this of all the things, don't worry, I've got you, and trust me, you're going to want to see this place. Please, everyone, imagine Germany. Perfect, thank you. Now point to the southeast corner. Wonderful. There to the right is the Czech Republic. And I'd say its shape kind of looks like a squeezed circle. Now, if you look towards the center and move your eyes a smidge up and to the left, there is Prague, a city that looks like a squeezed circle itself. And at its center is St. James the Greater. Now, greater than what? I assume more than any of us, because saints and rappers have the same formula when it comes to names. Anyway, I want you to take those peepers and those fingers and head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post, because there you will see the understated facade of this church. It's mostly minimal, with crisp lines and eggshell tone, and a handful of small arched windows, 3 of which are adorned with an exceptional pile of sculpted angels, cherubs, and some very serious-looking robed men. Now, looking at this exterior, you'd never know that the original structure was built in the 13th century. That's the 1200s, y'all. And it was meant to house the first Franciscans, who were a religious order parallel to the Catholic Church. And their logo is a shroomy trip. If for some reason you cannot bless your eyes with this magnificent design over at our social media stuffs, all you got to do is some drugs and imagine a cloud, like a big, big puffy cloud. Okay, great. And from that cloud, there are like 2 outstretched, disembodied arms. Okay, and they're crossing each other. Perfect. Okay, now the palms of these arms, They have stigmata, of course, which is a cut and a reference to the big-ass cross behind them, which is also rising from the cloud. And this cross is a symbol of the crucifixion. If you put this all together and you think this is a bit much, we haven't even begun. So let's get into it. My trippin' business goose, the original structure of St. James the Greater stood for 400 years, until it was mostly destroyed by fire in 1689. A fire rumored to have been started by people working for King Louis XIV of France. It's a lot of drama there, but the Catholic Church paid no mind. They basically said thanks for doing the demo and the hard work because they transformed the innards of a simple Franciscan ruin into what we see now. A Baroque-as-fuck megachurch of its day whose every square inch is adorned with ideology and suggestive ornamentation. My friends, let's step inside St. James and please prepare yourself. Swipe past the hallucinatory logo and you shall be transported into the hallucinatory halls of this church. It's a lot, and I'm going to give you a second just to take a look and take it all in. Yeah, overwhelming. Overwhelming is a word that doesn't quite cut it, so I'll provide some numbers and detail for context here. The rebuilding included the addition of over 20 altars. 20, because why the fuck not? In 1702, an organ was added. But if for a second you thought it would be any old organ, how dare you? Swipe past the entrance of St. James and you'll feel the crushing power and presence of this terrifying musical instrument, which has not one, not two, but 7 angels on it, and 8,277 pipes. Yes, over 8,000 pipes. That's impressive. It's impressive. But for shits and giggles, I Googled, where is the world's largest pipe organ? And I want you to guess. Where do you think the world's largest pipe organ could be? Okay, whatever you just thought, whatever you have in mind, it's wrong. And by a lot. Okay, it's at the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. The organ here has over 33,000 pipes and weighs over 150 tons. Yeah. Now, don't feel bad for St. James, though. It does have something that no other church on earth can claim. St. James the Greater, in the heart of Prague's old town, is home to a mummified arm hanging from its ceiling. And it's also home to a rumored live burial. These are actually separate incidents, and we should get into them. My intact business goose, please join me, will you, sometime between the 15 and 1600s, when a man, down on his luck and in the throes of poverty, entered this church in the evening, perhaps looking for guidance and solace, or perhaps looking for riches. Because as it turns out, he found only one of these things. Around the neck and at the feet of a statue of the Virgin Mary were expensive offerings and jewels that the man found too tempting. As the story goes, the man reached out for these jewels, and in a response, oh so fitting for an eternal empathetic mother and holy figure, the statue suddenly woke, grabbing his arm in such an impenetrable lock that the man found himself screaming and held in place until morning. There, Franciscan monks found him, caught in the act, and caught by the Virgin Mary. After numerous attempts to pry the man loose, the statue did not give way. If the man wanted forgiveness, it seemed, he would need to offer more than prayers. With no other way to get the man free, the monks called upon a nearby butcher who agreed, yeah, you know what, it's best to lose the arm. And so it was done. The man's arm was hacked off, and seemingly satisfied, the Virgin Mary returned to her former pose, never to move again. Now, Here the monks stood, with a bloody limb at their feet, and, let's be honest, most likely a dead man as well. So, what's to be done? If you said, let's string up the arm above the entrance as a warning for all thieves, and as a general warning to all about God's vengeance, you're right. Through countless renovations and artistic upgrades, there the arm hung for centuries. And it very much looks like it. Yeah, it's time. Please use a functional arm and swipe past the 8,277 pipes of St. James's organ. And you shall see. You'll see for yourself. Okay, I've got the photo open here, and every time I see it, folks, yeah, that's a bone. That is a bone, and it's hanging by a chain. And a part of it looks to be wrapped in some fabric that also turned black over the years, so that's a nice touch. Now, if you believe a statue animated and caused this man's dismemberment, or if you believe the man was caught stealing and found himself under the blade of some angry monks, or if you believe it's all bullshit, that's up to you. But Catholic churches do love them some bones on the premises, so we will get to it. Put a pin in that. We will get to it in the next segment, but in the meantime, let's finish this segment and our time here at St. James with a little accidental live burial. What do you say? About a century later, in 1712, a Czech nobleman with a very large name and a very large wig to match was found unresponsive in Vienna. That man was Count Johann Wenzel Ratislau of Mitrovice, of the Ratislau family, who, by the way, that family has a metal-as-fuck family crest. It looks like a demon that knows how to party. I will have a screenshot of it on Instagram and Twitter, so please, for the love of God, take a look. And if you're a Franciscan monk, take some notes. This is how you do it. Fucking amazing. Now, the Count had been suffering from a number of ailments, including obesity. So when they found his unconscious body ravaged by dropsy, aka fluid retention, and the buildup of fluid in the body's tissues, doctors believed it was time. Now, on one attached hand, we have an account that states his remains were interned for a year in Vienna's Totenkapelle before being moved to the Church of St. James the Greater in 1714, and really that was that. Nothing more to see here. But there's another story. One where the Count was laid to rest in St. James immediately after his funeral, but shortly thereafter, quote, horrible noises came from the tomb for days. The parishioners, thinking that the Count's soul couldn't rest, blessed the tomb and prayed for him until the noises suddenly stopped. End quote. These fucking monks, man. Round of applause. They're amazing. And thank you, allthesaintsyoushouldknow.com. Well, after all the hullabaloo ended, the years carried on without incident, and the Count remained quiet, under the hanging arm of an unknown thief. My friends, join me, will you, in the 1800s, when some much-needed repairs to St. James were underway. This included moving the, and I mean every letter of this, moving the elaborate sarcophagus crafted by the famous Baroque architect Fischer von Erlach, in which our Count called his final resting place. Take a look. Yeah, that thing had to be moved, okay? And to make the move easier on the team, the massive stone sculpture, which acted as the lid of the tomb, that was removed first. And to the absolute shock of everyone, they found the Count. He had somehow made his way out of the coffin inside it. Yeah, let that settle in. My claustrophobic business goose. The supposedly dead Count supposedly successfully made his way out of the coffin inside the tomb, but couldn't lift the hundreds of pounds of Baroque carvings above it. That is a legend which is still told to this day. after the break. Events that are 100% a real fucking thing and took place for centuries. Generations of royals who found themselves at death's door, exhuming dead miracle workers, all in hopes to get a few more years on Earth. Oh, and I forgot to mention the best part. Those dead folks were placed beside the royals in their sickbed. Yeah, exactly. You won't see any of this on The Crown or Bridgerton, so please, stay tuned.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When Johann Rall received the letter on Christmas Day 1776, he put it away to read later. Maybe he thought it was a season's greeting and wanted to save it for the fireside. But what it actually was a warning, delivered to the Hessian colonel, letting him know that General George Washington was crossing the Delaware and would soon attack his forces. The next day, when Rall lost the Battle of Trenton and died from 2 colonial Boxing Day musket balls, the letter was found, unopened, in his vest pocket. As someone with 15,000 unread emails in his inbox, I feel like there's a lesson there. Oh well, this is The Constant, a history of getting things wrong. I'm Mark Chrysler. Every episode, we look at the bad ideas, mistakes, and accidents that misshaped our world. Find us at constantpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, I'm going to need you to charge up the old time machine and bring along an extraordinary amount of hand sanitizer, like way more than you think you're going to need, because we're heading on over to Habsburg, Spain, which isn't a country per se, but an empire. My lowly business goose, Habsburg, Spain, refers to Spain and the Hispanic monarchy, aka the Catholic monarchy, which ruled from 1516 to 1700 under the kings from the House of Habsburg. So long of a story short about that. The House of Habsburg was also known as the House of Austria, whose families had a little tiff and broke into 2. The Austrian or German Habsburgs, led by a dude named Ferdinand, and the Spanish Habsburgs, led by a dude named Philip. All of their sons were named after them, which is why their names sound so familiar and repetitive. Anyway, back to Habsburg, Spain, which by the mid to late 1500s had already reached the zenith of its power, colonization, and reach. It had territories around the world, including modern-day Spain, a piece of southeast France, Portugal, and oh so many other lands outside the Iberian Peninsula, including the Americas and Asia. It was said the sun never set on this empire. There was just one itty-bitty problem, though. The ruling familial line of the Habsburgs of Spain, it was horrifically inbred. And unbeknownst to them, this line, thanks to genetics and the health consequences of such, would only last 200 years. We need to talk about some of the events that occurred during those 200 years and the lengths this family took to survive. So join me, will you, in the summer heat of Spain, where in July of 1545, the first son of King Philip II of Spain and Queen Maria Manuela of Portugal was born. It was, however, immediately clear that the boy, named Carlos, Prince of Asturias, and heir apparent, well, he was going to have some challenges in life. Carlos was born with unequal leg length and a condition called lorosis, which results in his shoulders and stance being vastly asymmetrical. As to what was happening on the inside, like his brain, we will get to, as exhibited by his violent tendencies later on, but in the meantime, to put his genetics into context, here is Carlos's family tree. The boy only had 4 great-grandparents instead of the typical 8 because Mom and Dad were technically first cousins. And I say technically because Mom and Dad had the same coefficient of relationship, which is a fancy way of saying they were actually more like half-siblings. And don't worry, it gets worse because I can explain. Carlos's maternal grandma and paternal grandpa were straight-up siblings. His maternal grandfather and his paternal grandmother were also, you guessed it, siblings. Of his only 4 great-grandparents, the 2 great-grandmothers were sisters. So yeah, baby Carlos was going to have an uphill battle while growing up. And it certainly didn't help that his mother, Queen Maria Manuel of Portugal, died just 4 days after giving birth from a hemorrhage. There was at least one attempt at raising the boy. Carlos was babysat by his paternal aunts, Maria and Joanna, until they were married off, and never to be seen again, really. If you're wondering where Dad was, well, Dad was too busy making sure the sun never set on this empire and was occupied with killing and colonizing. Carlos's only interaction with people was limited to tutors whose job was to teach and not to offer guidance or love. Needless to say, thanks to all of this, baby Carlos grew into an ever-exceedingly uncontrollable teen. Quote, Carlos began exhibiting violent behavior at a young age, often directing his aggression towards servants and animals. He reportedly once tried to force a shoemaker to eat shoes that he found unsatisfactory. His conduct and character gained notoriety at court, drawing the attention of foreign ambassadors. The Venetian ambassador, Girolamo Soranzo, thought that Carlos was ugly and repulsive. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Another Venetian, Paolo Tiepolo, wrote, Prince Carlos wished neither to study nor to take physical exercise, but only to harm others. End quote. From the wiki. Well, despite the evidence and public opinion surrounding him, 15-year-old Carlos was officially recognized in 1560 as the heir apparent. Perhaps that is why, when just 2 years later in 1562, while pretending to study at the University of Alcala, a 17-year-old Carlos sustained a severe head injury after falling down some stairs, that King Philip II showered him with more care and attention than Carlos had ever received in his life. The king gathered the most eminent doctors and autonomists around his son's bed, yet none of them were able to stabilize Carlos. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, and the wound on his forehead continued to flow and ooze. Within 10 days, he was experiencing delusions and excruciating pain. The king was growing impatient, and he could not have his firstborn son die. No. So, he did what any father in this situation would do. He cracked open his gigantic collection of Catholic bones and relics and had to make a decision. Which one of these should I lay next to my boy? Now, believe it or not, this was going to be a difficult decision. Quote, the king was a devout Catholic, known for his holy greed of relics. His collection, which he kept close to his own bedchambers, included 12 whole skeletons, 144 heads, and thousands of bones, all from known saints. Except 3. End quote. I don't know what to say with that. I don't know what to say. I don't have 144 of anything, let alone heads. Well, despite the lengthy menu of options here, the king's confessor, Bernardo di Fresneda, nailed it. Well, Bernardo suggested they seek the intervention of a local miracle maker, a man named Fray Diego de Alcala. Now, who the fuck is this? I'm so glad you asked. Another very long story short, Fray Diego served as a missionary who became a revered healer thanks to his work during an epidemic in Rome in 1450. I'll say that again, 1450, where he spent many months, air quotes, curing the diseased. Unfortunately, these healing powers were non-transferable to himself because he died in 1463 as a result of an abscess, so whoops. Now, although very much dead, quote, his corpse, instead of emitting a foul odor, as would be expected, it remained incorrupt and did not undergo rigor mortis and continued to exude a pleasant fragrance, end quote. And that was from Alvaro Pascual Chanel and Angel Rodriguez Ribolo in a 2014 paper, The Life and Posthumous Y'all, words are tough today. In their paper that came out in 2014, The Miracles of Saint Diego of Alcala. Now, stinking nice after death is something. It's very impressive. But the miracles didn't end here with Diego. One of very dead Diego's most famous miracles took place just 2 weeks after his death, when King Henry IV of Castile had fallen from a horse and injured his arm. Hearing of this fragrant and incorrupt corpse, the king was like, "Get me some of that," and apparently, the dead man and the king held hands, which reportedly cured Henry of his injury. So, now King Philip was like, you know what, if it's good for King Henry, it's got to be good for my son. So he ordered the exhumation of Fray Diego de Alcala, who had died 100 years prior. So, what happened after, quote, the sarcophagus was opened so his mummified remains could be brought to the prince's room where they were ceremoniously laid next to him, end quote? I'm so glad you asked. Drumroll, please. Thank you in the back. Continuing from orderofthegooddeath.com, quote, days later, Don Carlos finally woke up. He told his father that he dreamed of Diego, who said he would live. His miraculous recovery was attributed to the relic's sacred power, and the friar was later canonized as a saint. End quote. Well, wow. So, did Carlos survive his tumble thanks to some... So gross, I'm sorry. I have to do it again. I'll say it again. Did Carlos survive his tumble thanks to some skin-on-skin contact with a century-old corpse? Or was it the trepanation of his skull performed by the anatomist... What happened to me? Was it the trepanation of his skull performed by the anatomist Andreas Vesuelas? Or the series of ointments supplied by other doctors? Who's to say what it could have been? Who knows? In fact, who cares what anyone said but the king? And the king says it was all due to the saint. Now, I truly wish I could tell you with this experience that Carlos and Philip bonded and renewed their relationship. Absolutely not. In fact, it got a whole lot worse from here. Yet another long story short, King Philip repeatedly took Carlos's fiancées for his own. And Carlos's mental illnesses and violent tendencies just escalated. It was really rough. He almost burned down a civilian's home after he was accidentally splashed with water thrown from a window of said house. But the final straw came when Carlos asked John of Austria to smuggle him away to Italy. John was like, I don't want anything to do with this kid, and ratted him out to King Philip. Carlos became so enraged, he attempted to shoot John, but luckily, a damn good servant had the idea of unloading Carlos's weapon beforehand, so that didn't happen. But don't worry, Carlos didn't give up. Quote, he then attacked John with his bare hands. After hearing about the attack, Philip ordered that Carlos be confined to his own room without contact from the outside world, end quote, from the wiki. And that is exactly what happened. Carlos was sentenced to solitary confinement. And he fought back with a number of hunger strikes, but Philip simply didn't care. In July of 1568, at the age of 23, the prince was found dead in his room, most likely a result of starvation, and no saint could revive him. Now, that's a fucking bummer. So, to lift spirits, no pun intended, let's end this episode with a few more Habsburgs royalty having their way with corpses so they could live just a little longer. What do you say? Excellent. Quote, in 1619, 57 years after the episode of Prince Don Carlos, Philip III, the successor of Philip II, fell gravely ill when he traveled from Portugal to Madrid. As death loomed close, a procession brought from Madrid to his bedside the incorrupt body of Isidore the Laborer, an 11th century farm worker known for having performed several miracles in his lifetime, but yet to be a saint. His mummy, though considered miraculous, had been mutilated twice, according to oral tradition. The first time in 1381, when Queen Consort Juana Manuel demanded one arm, but returned it on the spot, since she was suddenly struck with an outburst of uncontrollable emotion, and the second time in the 15th century, when a servant of Queen Isabella bit off one of its toes as she pretended to ceremoniously kiss its feet. Isidore's body was laid next to Philip III, and it allegedly revived the king. And his canonization, initiated by Philip II, was finally completed in 1622. End quote, from orderofthegooddeath.com. Well, that's a happy ending, I guess. Philip's is A-okay, and Isidore's never got his toe back, but he's a saint now. Let's continue on. In 1641, when Queen Mariana of Austria went into labor, both bodies of Diego and Isidore were dusted off and brought to her bedside, where she gave birth to a live boy who would eventually become the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, Charles II. Charles I could not have children due to the Spanish Habsburgs' excessive inbreeding, but at the time the problem was, of course, placed on his wife, Maria Anna of Neuburg, who then tried delete. Apologies for that. When Charles II grew up, he could not have children due to the Spanish Habsburgs' excessive inbreeding. So the problem, of course, was placed on his wife, Maria Anna of Neuburg. So she tried a number of agonizing fertility treatments of the 1600s. You can use your imagination. Unsuccessful, she resorted to grinding up Isidore's remains and placed them in a silver urn which she carried around in her arms. It didn't work. As to what happened to that urn, to Isidore, not to worry. His remains were adopted by the next dynasty, that of the Bourbons, who all welcomed this urn into their royal chambers. What a day this was. I hope you're okay. Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends. Just tell them. Anytime. It's always the right time to tell them all of this, any of this. And then just see how they react. And then you tell me then how they react. Okay. And a violating Phil thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you'll love the other podcasts in this family. And please, stay interesting.